Welcome to Psyche Talks.
Today we're plunging into Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, a work that, well, it continues to resonate deeply, doesn't
That
it?
really does. Our exploration is based on excerpts from a YouTube transcript by a Urdu book, so it gives us a concentrated look at his powerful ideas.
Right. And our aim in this deep dive is, I guess, twofold. First, to understand the core principles of logotherapy. That's Frankl's unique and really influential approach to therapy.
Okay.
And second, to unpack the profound insights he gained from his, frankly, horrific experiences in Nazi concentration camps. Those experiences inform that very therapy.
So the theory and the experience are inseparable here.
Absolutely. We'll be drawing on both Frankl's personal account and Gordon Allport's insightful preface, sources you, our listener, shared, to really get at the essence of resilience and that fundamental human drive for purpose.
Okay, so let's unpack this then, starting with Allport's preface. He introduces Viktor Frankl not just as, a psychiatrist and author, but crucially as someone who experienced these horrors firsthand. It really frames everything that follows, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Allport points to a fundamental question Frankl asked his patients, even before the camps, which is fascinating.
Whoa.
He'd ask them, why do you not commit suicide?
Wow. Direct.
Very. And Allport notes that the answers they gave, those reasons to live, often laid the groundwork for Frankl's whole therapeutic approach.
So finding reasons to live became the foundation.
Exactly. It became the bedrock of logotherapy.
And logotherapy, as Allport explains it, it's Frankl's kind of specific take on existential analysis.
That's right. A school of thought centered on those, big questions about being human meaning, responsibility in life, that sort of thing.
Got it.
And Allport emphasizes this focus on meaning and responsibility as absolutely central to Frankl's view. Then he lays bare the immense personal tragedy Frankl endured.
Yeah, the law.
The loss of his mother, father, brother, and his wife in the camps. Only his sister survived.
It's almost impossible to comprehend.
And that's layered on top of losing all possessions, having his values systematically destroyed, hunger, cold, brutality, and just the constant looming threat of extermination.
Truly unimaginable, and Allport makes such a powerful point here. Because Frankl's insights were forged in that crucible, in his own experience, they have this undeniable, profound honesty.
Exactly. It's wisdom born from suffering, as you say. Hard to argue with.
Right.
Allport then draws a really interesting contrast between Frankl and Freud.
Okay, how so?
Well, Freud, he located anxiety and unconscious conflicts, sexual frustrations, that kind of thing.
The classic Freudian idea.
Right. But Frankl identified what he called noogenic neuroses.
Nogenic.
Yeah, basically psychological distress stemming from a lack of meaning and responsibility, from a frustration of our fundamental will to meaning.
So it's not just feeling down, it's deeper. Like feeling your life lacks purpose. That nagging feeling, there's got to be more.
Precisely. It's an existential unease.
Yeah.
Frankl essentially flipped the script on traditional psychology at the time.
Suggesting that our search for purpose, or failing to find it, is maybe a bigger driver of distress than those Freudian ideas. Which was, well, pretty radical then.
A very significant departure. And Allport highlights that in Europe, there was this growing intellectual shift away from purely Freudian thought, more openness to existential analysis.
And logotherapy became a key voice in that.
It emerged right within that movement.
It's also good to hear Frankl wasn't, rigid about it. Allport mentions he built on Freud's work and welcomed connections with other existential therapies.
Yeah, Allport underscores that inclusive perspective. He wasn't trying to tear everything down, but build on it, integrate it.
That sounds much more constructive.
Definitely. Allport also mentions how gripping Frankl's writing is. Says he's read the narrative part in a single sitting.
I can believe that. It pulls you in.
It really does. He then touches on the initial psychological responses of prisoners entering the camps, which weren't quite what you might expect.
Not immediate despair.
Not exactly.
Yeah.
More like an initial shock, followed by this almost cold, detached curiosity about what would happen, how one might survive.
Like a primal survival mode kicking in, almost observing yourself.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Allport describes this initial phase marked by detached curiosity and a rapid, almost instinctual development of strategies for self-preservation, even against impossible odds.
But he also mentions moments of solace.
Small glimmers, yes. Memories of loved ones, faith, humor, surprisingly, and even fleeting glimpses of nature.
But those moments, Allport says, weren't enough on their own right. They needed to connect to something bigger.
Exactly. Not enough unless they connected to a larger sense of meaning amidst the seemingly pointless suffering. And this brings us right to the core of existentialism, as Frankl presents it. It's the inescapable link between living and suffering, and the crucial need to find meaning within that suffering itself.
Finding meaning in suffering, that's tough.
It's a critical insight. Allport quotes Nietzsche here, "He who has a why to live can bear with almost anyhow."
Ah, that famous quote. It really sums it up.
It encapsulates so much of Frankl's philosophy.
In that brutal camp context where everything was stripped away, Allport highlights Frankl's idea of the last of human freedoms.
Yes, the power to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances.
That's an incredibly powerful idea to think about, even when you have nothing else.
Exactly. That inner freedom, the ability to decide how we respond, even when stripped of all external power. That's what Frankl saw as the ultimate expression of our humanity.
And Allport says even ordinary prisoners showed this.
Yes, by choosing to be worthy of their suffering, they demonstrated this remarkable capacity to sort of transcend their horrific external reality.
And Frankl, as a therapist, was interested in how to help people tap into that.
Absolutely. How to awaken that feeling of responsibility to life, no matter how bleak things seemed.
Allport even mentions Frankl conducting a therapeutic session with fellow prisoners.
Wow. In the camp itself. And for the book itself, Allport points out that it includes the basics of logotherapy and a bibliography. So it's not just a memoir, it's also an introduction to Frankl's framework.
Makes it doubly valuable.
Definitely. Finally, Allport contrasts Frankl's outlook, essentially hopeful, not pessimistic, open to religion, even with some other European existentialists who were perhaps more bleak.
So even after seeing the absolute worst of humanity,
He maintained a fundamental belief in our capacity for meaning, for transcendence even.
that's quite something, a key takeaway from Allport.
It really is. Now, let's turn to Frankl's own narrative, the prisoner's experience. This is where those powerful ideas become starkly, viscerally real.
Right. And he emphasizes from the get-go, this isn't some detached account. It's deeply personal about everyday life in the smaller camps.
Yes, where most of the actual extermination happened. He wants to give voice to the unknown and unrecorded victims, not the heroes or martyrs necessarily, and definitely not the privileged prisoners, the capos.
So the focus is on the ordinary prisoner.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those who had no special status, often treated with contempt even by the capos, the prisoner overseers. He describes this brutal, hard fight for existence, just a relentless daily struggle for a bit of bread, for life itself.
In the initial shock, he paints a harrowing picture. Losing everything personal, the dehumanization stripped, shaved, showered.
It's a systematic erasure of identity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Deliberate and brutal, stripping away everything that made you you.
Yet, amidst that, he notes something surprising. Humor.
A strange, almost gallows humor, yeah. And that detached curiosity we mentioned, a kind of psychological self-defense in those early days.
Maybe the mind just grasps for anything to cope, to create distance.
Seems likely. He also talks about the astonishing capacity for sheer physical endurance, sleeping crammed in bunks, the awful hygiene, severe malnutrition.
Yet people survived.
He recounts these brutal realities, but marvels at the body's almost unbelievable ability to withstand it. He mentions Dostoevsky's grim line about man getting used to anything.
But adds a caveat.
Yeah, Frankl adds that the prisoners hadn't fully reached that absolute point of adaptation. Thank goodness, perhaps.
And suicide was a constant thought.
Pervasive, born from utter hopelessness and the constant danger. He mentions the chilling camp phrase, running into the wire.
A common way out, tragically.
It was a dark shadow, always looming. Frankl shares his own personal decision not to do that. He also describes this fleeting, cruel thing, the delusion of reprieve,
What's that?
a brief, naive hope some new arrivals had, that maybe things wouldn't be quite as terrible as they seemed. Quickly shattered, of course.
He recounts some grim advice, too, about appearing fit.
Oh, right, the absolute necessity of appearing fit for work, to avoid being labeled a Muslim.
Which makes
Someone seen as too weak, emaciated, unable to work, destined for the gas chambers. A brutal, stark lesson in the calculus of survival.
just maintaining that facade must have been exhausting.
Relentless pressure. And then Frankl offers this profound insight. An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior.
That's so important. It validates their experiences.
Exactly. It reframes extreme psychological states, not as weakness, but as understandable reactions to unimaginable horror.
Then he moves into the second phase, apathy.
Yes, a pervasive apathy. And Emotional death, he calls it. A necessary, though devastating, mechanism of self-defense.
The mind shutting down to protect itself.
Basically, this emotional numbing was an essential, though tragic, survival strategy. Allowed them to endure the constant onslaught without completely breaking.
And their mental life regressed.
Dreams became fixated on the most basic needs. Bread, cake, cigarettes, a warm bath. Simple comforts that were now impossibly luxurious.
He tells that story about the nightmare.
Oh yeah, being woken by someone groaning from a nightmare and Frankl's own chilling realization. No dream could possibly be as bad as the waking reality of the camp.
That just drives home the horror.
Starkly contrasts the inner world of dreams with the unyielding external nightmare. He also details how the desire for food became the all-consuming instinct.
Dominating thoughts, conversations.
Endless discussions, elaborate fantasies about future meals they might never see.
Interestingly, he notes less focus on sex.
Relatively little sexual perversion in the all-male camps, he says, suggests the primal focus narrowed entirely to survival. Sustenance trumped almost everything else.
Survival as the absolute priority.
He also describes a kind of cultural hibernation,
Meaning,
like intellectual and artistic life mostly shut down. The exceptions were politics, mostly based on unreliable rumors and, surprisingly, a deep, sincere religious interest.
religion came back.
For many, yes. Improvised prayers, secret services, a seeking of solace and meaning beyond the physical.
He mentions the typhus outbreak, too, and trying to stay awake.
Harrowing, desperate attempts to avoid delirium, and his own incredible effort to mentally reconstruct his lost manuscript.
Trying to salvage his life's work amidst that devastation.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the enduring need for meaning, for creative expression, for identity.
He also tells a strange story about a seance.
Yeah, a somewhat surreal anecdote about a seance in the sick quarters, and this seemingly inexplicable message appearing on paper.
A reminder that people seek meaning even in irrational ways sometimes.
Perhaps, or just the strangeness of minds under extreme pressure. But then he explains how, paradoxically, spiritual life could deepen there,
How so?
allowing sensitive individuals to retreat into a rich inner world. Thoughts, feelings, memories. A form of inner freedom.
And that sometimes helps survival, even for less physically strong people.
That's his observation. Those with a strong inner life were often better equipped psychologically. He then describes the dehumanizing routines, marching, shouted commands, the constant threat of violence.
Contrasting that with moments of intense longing for the past, for loved ones.
Yes, that agonizing internal battle between cherished memories and the brutal present, a constant source of pain.
Yet, amidst that bleakness, moments of beauty.
Unexpectedly, yes. Deep appreciation for art, for nature, brief, almost transcendent escapes.
Like the sunset from the train, the dawn in the trench.
Powerful examples. Fleeting encounters with beauty that served as vital lifelines. Reminders of a world beyond the wire.
And humor played a role, too.
Another surprise, maybe, but crucial. A means of achieving emotional distance, rising above the situation, even for a second.
He tells that story about training his friend.
The surgeon, yeah. Deliberately inventing amusing stories about life after liberation. It shows the mind's power to seek light, even in total darkness.
Humor as a survival tool.
A surprisingly valuable one. Frankl then uses that analogy, gas filling a chamber.
To explain suffering and joy.
Right. Their relative nature in the camp. How even tiny things could bring intense joy in that context.
Like the journey from Auschwitz, fearing Mauthausen, relativity of fear.
Exactly, and he talks about negative happiness.
Which is just the absence of suffering.
Basically, freedom from suffering in a relative way. Real positive pleasures were incredibly rare, like the cook who ladled soup equally.
Such a small thing, but huge then.
Took on extraordinary significance. He contrasts the outsider's potentially sentimental view with a prisoner's harsh reality, but also acknowledges these occasional, almost unbelievable moments of contentment, like his time in the sick quarters.
And his decision to volunteer for the typhus camp.
Driven not by self-preservation, but a desire to find meaning, even facing probable death.
That drive for meaning again.
It's constant. He explains how everything not related to immediate survival lost its value, leading to mental turmoil, threatening core values.
He describes the mortuary, looking out at the landscape, thoughts of home.
A poignant image, that enduring connection to life, to loved ones even surrounded by death.
And the minimal value placed on human life. The lists, the number.
Shockingly impersonal, illustrated by the transport of the sick. Just numbers.
He shares his own strategy during selections.
Answer truthfully, but volunteer nothing extra. a precarious tightrope walk, avoid unwanted attention.
Navigating those selections, a constant gamble. He mentions arriving at Auschwitz, multiple selections.
Yeah.
Bewildering, terrifying.
And the uncertainty about the rest camp transport. Was it real or something else?
Then that moment, saying goodbye to his friend Otto, entrusting him with last wishes for his wife.
Heartbreaking, but shows the strength of love, friendship, even then, enduring connections.
And the transport did go to a rest camp. He escaped something worse.
Unbelievably, yes.
Yeah.
Narrowly escaped horrific conditions in the old camp, including, well, cannibalism.
Chilling, just the stark reality of that close call.
He then shares that parable, death in Tehran.
To illustrate what?
The prisoner's fear of making decisions, the overwhelming sense that fate was in control, the choices were futile, even dangerous.
That profound powerlessness.
Exactly. Frankl then describes his own inner torment, faced with a chance to escape.
But he stayed.
His ultimate decision was to stay with his patients, and finding, surprisingly, a profound inner peace in that choice.
Choosing responsibility over escape speaks volumes.
About his commitment, his sense of duty. He recounts the chaotic last day before liberation, gates closing, the impulsive escape attempt with his friend, and the tragedy of those who hid in the tracks.
Just constant danger right to the very end.
And uncertainty. He then revisits apathy, explaining it as a result of the physical deprivation, hunger, no sleep, vermin, plus the mental complexes, like feeling degraded.
Contrasting it with the kapos.
Right, who often didn't feel that same degradation, sometimes even had delusions of grandeur, while the ordinary prisoners felt crushed.
He also mentions irritability.
Pervasive, explosive irritability, exacerbated by others' apathy and the constant fear of inspections, just unrelenting tension. But then he tackles liberty, spiritual freedom, even in those conditions.
He firmly asserts.
Yes.
Prisoners did have a choice in their actions. He gives examples of people overcoming apathy, suppressing irritability, an affirmation of human agency.
He emphasizes that the kind of person a prisoner became was an inner decision, a choice, not solely determined by the camp.
He brings in Dostoevsky again.
There is only one thing that I dread, not to be worthy of my sufferings. Powerful.
Meaning our response is what matters.
Exactly. That spiritual freedom is what makes life meaningful, purposeful. Even in suffering is how we choose to respond.
And he outlines 3 ways to find meaning.
Creative work, experiencing something or someone especially love, and crucially, our attitude towards unavoidable suffering.
He tells that story of the young invalid.
Finding meaning and facing death with courage, with dignity, making his suffering count, in a way.
And the young woman connecting with the tree.
Incredibly poignant. Knowing she would die, yet finding solace, meaning, gratitude in her connection to that single tree, its blossoms. Seeing it as a message. I am here. I am life, eternal life.
Wow, that image, it stays with you.
Beautifully illustrates finding profound connection even in utter desolation. Frankl reiterates the prisoner's inner hold on their moral, spiritual self was crucial for resisting the camp's degenerating influences.
Then he talks about not knowing the end date, the provisional existence.
Yes, that uncertainty had a profoundly depressing, disorienting effect, altered their inner lives, created deformed time.
Like time stretching out endlessly. He compares it to unemployment.
A subjective experience. He even references Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, another exploration of that state.
Describes feelings of lifelessness, the outside world seeming unreal.
And warns against getting stuck in the past. Missing opportunities, however small, in the present.
But even difficult situations offer chances for growth.
That's his point. Exceptionally difficult external situations can provide opportunities for spiritual growth, and having a future goal is vital.
For inner strength, like his own experience mentally giving a lecture.
Yeah, on the psychology of the concentration camp. As a way to transcend his suffering, maintain purpose. An incredible example.
He uses Spinoza's idea here, too.
Right, that an emotion stops being suffering once we form a clear picture of it. Understanding gives distance, control.
And losing faith in the future. That was dangerous.
Devastating. Led to a loss of spiritual hold, rapid decline, refusing to get dressed, eat, giving up.
He tells that tragic story, the composer.
The one whose dream of liberation on March 30th was followed by his death from typhus on March 31st. A stark illustration of the hope-body connection.
And the death rate spike around Christmas 44?
Linked to the disappointment of not being home as hoped. Shows how critical hope, a sense of future, really was.
Which brings us back to Nietzsche.
He who has a why to live for can bear with almost anyhow. Frankl saw this as a guiding motto for psychotherapy.
But some prisoners rejected encouragement, saying, I have nothing to expect from life.
The common response from those lost in despair. Frankl says what was needed was a fundamental shift in attitude,
How so?
recognizing it's not what we expect from life, but what life expects from us, with all its challenges and demands.
That completely flips the perspective, emphasizes our responsibility.
Exactly. He then brings in love again,
Yeah.
as fundamental, how loving someone deepens our own being.
And meaning found in suffering.
Yes, as unavoidable and intrinsic part of life. Once that meaning was revealed, prisoners often refused to minimize their pain. They saw its potential for inner achievement.
Suffering became a task.
A task requiring courage. Even bearing it with tears was an achievement.
He mentions therapy starting in the camp.
Tentative beginnings, individual collective efforts, often focused on preventing suicides, reminding people life still expected something.
Like the man with the child waiting, the scientist with unfinished books.
Powerful examples, the life-saving power of future-oriented meaning, responsibility. Frankl stresses the uniqueness of each individual, their irreplaceability, underscoring their responsibility for their existence.
And positive examples helped. From wardens.
Yes, he tells that inspiring story of the senior block warden, giving that impromptu talk after a fast.
Addressing the loss of hope.
Reminding them what they still had inside, the potential ahead, even quoting Nietzsche and a poet, shows the power of leadership, shared humanity.
Even small acts of encouragement mattered hugely.
Profoundly life-affirming. Frankl insists there are always opportunities for meaning. Human life never ceases to have meaning, including suffering, including dying.
He shares that anecdote, the comrade making a pact with heaven.
Offering his suffering and death to save his loved one. A powerful example of finding meaning in selfless sacrifice, even in utter despair.
But he also reflects, it was rare to have the strength to connect. Missed opportunities.
A poignant reflection on the difficulty of maintaining that connection under such duress. He then transitions to the third stage, the psychology after liberation.
Which wasn't straightforwardly joyous.
Not necessarily. Initial relief, yes, a gradual realization of freedom. But the intense inner pressure was often followed by emotional emptiness, total relaxation, but not always immediate joy.
And two experiences threatened the liberated prisoners, bitterness and
Disillusionment, unexpected consequences,
also miss came from.
the superficiality, the lack of understanding back home, people just not getting it.
And disillusionment.
The harsh realization that suffering doesn't end. And the pain of finding no one waiting, or that cherished dreams were shattered by loss.
He gives those heartbreaking examples. The imagined reunion with someone no longer there.
Vividly highlights the cruel realities some survivors faced. Even if they didn't expect happiness, they were often unprepared for such profound unhappiness.
And eventually the camp experience fades, becomes like a nightmare.
He says for every survivor, the day comes when they can't fully comprehend how they endured it. It recedes, seems almost unreal.
But he ends that section on a powerful, hopeful note.
Yes, the crowning experience for the homecoming person. The wonderful feeling that after all that suffering, there's nothing left in the world to fear, except maybe their own conscience, their God.
A profound inner liberation.
Beyond just physical freedom, an unshakable inner strength.
Wow. Today's deep dive into man's search for meaning, it's really offered a profound glimpse into human resilience against unimaginable adversity.
We've explored Frankl's core ideas, haven't we? That fundamental will to meaning, and that ultimate freedom choosing our attitude, even in the worst circumstances.
And you, the listener, with your curiosity, your desire for knowledge, maybe you can find echoes of these insights in your own life, in the challenges you face.
We really encourage you to consider Frankl's question. What does life, in its own way, expect from you?
We hope this exploration sparked some, aha moments, a deeper appreciation for the power of meaning in navigating life's difficulties.
But this is really just the beginning, isn't it? We wholeheartedly encourage you to seek out Frankl's book, read it fully, and maybe delve into existential psychology more broadly.
Ask yourself, what questions come up for you now? What aspects resonated most deeply?
There's so much more there.
Thank you for your continued support and for listening to Psyche Talks.